Well, hello to everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit about this Android ecosystem for this video. So we'll start without wasting any more time because we got to get to it. We got a lot of good stuff to do. All right, be quiet and tell me. You betcha. Android is an operating system designed for use on mobile devices. The Android operating system was originally created for use in digital cameras. Bet you didn't know that, did you? So the Android operating system is developed primarily for use now on smartphones and touch tablets by Android and Google. Google bought the Android company in 2005, and the Android operating system was released in 2008. Although Android is developed for smartphones and tablets, today it's still being used in Android televisions, smartwatches, Android Auto, and Android Wear devices. Android Auto is the car smart multimedia system, in case you weren't aware. So, Android operating system is used in more than 100 languages today. That's 5.22 billion people who are using a mobile phone today. And that equates to 66.6% of the world's total population. Also, more than 2 billion people use the Android operating system as of May 2017. Google Play has more than 2.8 million applications published, and more than 6,000 applications are published on Google Play every day. More than 20 million application developers will be needed in the next few years. Yeah, I'm looking at you, right? So this means that you need to learn this Android application development really, well, I'd say kind of quickly, but thoroughly, but quickly. So I believe this course is going to be really good for your process, okay? So after this course, you will be a very good Android application developer. All right, well, at least a good one. Anyway, let's get going. So another motivation factor, let's talk a little bit about salary. I know you wonder how much your salary is going to be. Well, I'll let you in on a little thing here. Junior Android developer salaries are more than $55,000 per year in the U.S., but I believe you're going to make more. Middle-level Android developer salaries, more than $100,000. Senior-level Android developer salaries is about $130,000 U.S. dollars per annum, as they say. So this chapter was just to give you some, general information about the Android ecosystem. Hope it was useful. After this video, we're going to start to install Android Studio. If you're ready, let's go. Well, hello, friends. So in this lesson, we're going to download the interface that we're going to use to develop an Android mobile application. It's called Android Studio. Then we're going to do the necessary setup, okay? So Android Studio is completely free. It can be downloaded and used by anyone and everyone. And you know what? Without any further ado, let's just get started to download Android Studio right this very moment. So first, we'll go to our favorite browser, and in the search field, just type in Android Studio Download. Press Enter. Okay, so here you'll see the second result. In my case, Download Android Studio and SDK Tools site. So if you notice, my friends, this site here is developer.android.com. So this site is a particular site that Android developers must follow, okay? So you can follow latest Android developments, updates, documentation required for application development, and everything else they want to talk about. So yeah, we can continue with the download right now. Now, in its current version, as you see, of Android Studio, it's available. And now I do have to mention here that Android Studio is continually updating itself. So the most recent version shooting this video is 4.1.1. So this version may be a little different for you depending upon when you're doing it, but Android Studio's download and installation processes are always the same. So even if you do see a different version here, have no fear, my dear. you can download and install by following the steps that I'm going to explain. Okay? So if your computer's operating system is 64-bit, you can start the download just by clicking the Download Android Studio button right here. Now, I do want to point something out to you. If you don't happen to know your computer's operating system, just find out, like I'll show you here. So just click on the Windows icon in the lower left corner, open up the computer application, and see the window that opens. Select this PC. It's this tab on the left, and right-click with the mouse. Now, when you select the Properties option at the bottom of the window that opens, the window containing the basic properties of the computer will open. All right. So from this window, you can find out your operating system, how many bits it runs at, etc., etc. All right, so let's go back and continue from where we left off. So if your computer's operating system is not Windows, you can click the Download Options tab right here on the left. And when we click on this tab, we can see the download links for Windows 64-bit, Mac 64-bit, and Linux 64-bit. So these are the operating systems. Now, please note that such an option does not appear for 32-bit operating systems because Android Studio does not support 32-bit operating systems since Android Studio 4.0. All right? Now, if your operating system happens to be 32-bit, go ahead and download Android Studio 3.6.3. All right, that's the last version of Android Studio before version 4.0. So for this, you can click the Download Archives link just right in here. And from the window that opens, need to accept the relevant contract terms. So I'll just click on I'll agree. And as you can see, we've already accessed all the versions of Android Studio. So here you can find 3.6.3 and use the download link required for 32-bit operating systems. All right, my friends, we can all work together. All right, so let's go ahead and start the download process. So I'll open up my previous page since the operating system of my computer is Windows 64-bit. I'll download the appropriate Android Studio, and here I'll click on the file with the .exe extension. Right? So we need to accept the terms of the contract required to download Android Studio. Then after confirming with this checkbox here, the button that we'll use to download Android Studio becomes active. So that means that when we click on this button, the download process is going to start. So I'm going to go ahead and click. And as you see, the download process has started for me. Of course, this download might take a little longer for you depending upon where you are and your internet speed and bandwidth. So I'm going to just speed up this part. Okay, so now that the download's complete, I'll click the arrow icon to the right of the file that I downloaded and choose the Show in Folder option. So this way we can view the file that we downloaded. So I'll double-click this file. And here, Windows is giving me a warning. Do you really want to run this file? Well, I'm clicking the Run option because, yeah. So the warning might not have appeared for you. It's not necessarily important. So the setup screen opens, and from here, I can just press the Next button. Press the Next button again. All right, so now here is the location where the files will be saved. You can, of course, change this location, or you can remain in default. And I'll just, you know what? In fact, I usually prefer the default file path. That way I don't have to remember anything. Okay, so just press Next and one more time without making any changes. All right, so here it's going to ask if we can create shortcuts for Android Studio. Now, I do want it to create a shortcut. You might not want to create a shortcut. But you do have to confirm with this checkbox here. And again, I will not make any changes. And now we can start the setup process. So by clicking the Install button here, This is going to start the installation process, and I'll press the install button. And what you're seeing here is the starting of the installation process, okay? So the process is going to take a little time, so I'll speed up this. All right, my friends, installation is now complete, so I'll press the next button, and it states that the installation process of Android Studio is now complete. If we want Android Studio to be started after the installation process, we will need to check this box. So I uncheck it and start Android Studio together. All right, I press the finish button, and that completes the necessary setup. So we'll take a short break here, and in the next tutorial, we're going to examine Android Studio's interface. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Well, hello, friends. In our previous lesson, we downloaded Android Studio onto our computers, set it up, but the installation process is not yet completely finished. So in this lesson, we're going to complete the SDK setups. And we'll also examine in detail how to create a project in Android Studio. So let's get started. All right, first we'll find the application called Android Studio, and that's the one that we downloaded from the search bar. Now, by typing Android Studio right here, we can find the application that we downloaded. Easy as that. And there's the app. So now I'll just click on the Open option. And now that opens the application. As you can see, a window like Android Studio Setup Wizard opens. Now we can start the setup. So I'll press the next button. And right here, we'll come across two different options: standard installation, custom installation. Now you can select the standard setup here and complete the necessary setup procedures. But I want to show you all the steps in the setup phase. So I'm going to choose the custom option just so that you are aware of it. So I'll press next again. And on this page, it asks us to select the JDK. And that means Java Development Kit and where it's going to be located. So at this stage, it's pretty useful to explain what the JDK is. It is indeed the developer kit developed by Oracle, the founder of Java, in order to develop Java programming language applications using Android Studio. Now, of course, this kit comes embedded with Android Studio, so we don't need to install JDK separately. And that's why we choose the embedded JDK option here. So we can press the next button again. And here, too, we can choose the background color of the interface that we will encode. There are two different options: Darkula and Light. I usually prefer the light mode. You can also change these settings later. Now I'll press the next button again. Now on this page, we will do the necessary steps for SDK. And that basically means Software Development Kit. And here's where we install it. Now you can see there are three different options here: Android SDK Platform, Performance, and Android Virtual Device. So it's worth noting at this point that we can test the applications that we make in Android Studio on virtual devices offered to us by Android Studio. So the settings here are generally related to the performance of this virtual device. And I just suggest you choose all the options here. Otherwise, you may run into some problems later on, but that's why I generally choose all three options. Now, just below, we'll need to specify the SDK location. And of course, I generally use default locations. But of course, you can save it to any folder that you want. And I'll press the next button again. And on this page for the emulator, we can adjust the RAM size that we're going to give to it. In general, we can always use the size suggested here. And then while your emulator is running, the size that you set will be used from your RAM. Of course, when you turn off the emulator, your RAM continues to run at the size before it started. All right. So without changing anything, I'll just click the next button. So this page also lists the settings that we've made so far. And if there's any setting that you want to change, you can always return to the pages where we made the relevant settings just by pressing previous. And if you don't make any changes, if you can just confirm all the settings. And that completes the installation when you click the Finish button. All right, so yeah, the download starts. And again, the process may take a little while. So I'm going to just jump ahead, and then we'll continue where we left off. Okay, so now the installation's complete. I just press the Finish button. And now what you see here is creating a new project in Android Studio or opening an existing project. So more precisely, this will be the first screen that we see whenever we open the Android Studio. Now we can create a new project. So I'll choose a Create New Project option here. And then from this page, we'll choose a template for the Android project that we're going to create. So first, let's have a look at the different tabs here. And as you know, Android operating system is used not only in phones and tablets, but also in watches, televisions, cars, and many other things out there. So if you want your application to work on whatever type of device you want your application to work on, you need to choose a template suitable for the device in question. Now, of course, since we will develop applications for tablets and phones, we're going to use the Phone and Tablet tab. And certainly there are many different templates under this tab. Android Studio offers us some ready-made templates so that we can, get some faster results when you're creating projects. For example, we're going to make an application related to Google Maps, so we can make use of this template here. Now, oftentimes we'll choose a blank template. And if you notice, there's an expression here called empty activity. So we're going to hear the concept of activity very often from now on, because in Android, the software part and the interface of design that's shown to the users is the activity. All right. You might be a little unfamiliar with the concepts right now, but as we move along throughout our lessons, we're going to examine each of the concepts in detail. But just stick with me for now and choose the empty activity option and press the next button. From this page it opens, we will configure the project that we will create. So in other words, we'll determine the name and the programming language of our project right here on this page. So let's make some of those definitions. So I'm going to name my project first up. You can type in any name that you want, but at the same time, I think that the name that you write here will be the name of your application, don't you? For now, I'll just write first project because I also want it to be very clear what it is. And the second field is where we set the package name of our project. You can think of the package name as your application ID, right? So generally the project package names are created as com.anything.application names. So if you leave it as this example, you wouldn't be able to publish your application on Google Play because Google accepts the phrase, the example, as, well, sample work, and it doesn't allow it to be published on Google Play. So therefore, if you work for a company or, well, even if you're just a private developer, you can enter specific phrases, right? Such as your company name or even your own, last name or whatever. I'm just going to leave it as example for now. because I'm not going to be publishing this anywhere. Now, the third part here is the file path, and this is where our project will be saved. So as always, you can save your project in any folder on your computer. But notice, though, that there are / and project names at the end of the file path. So if you change the file path, just be sure to add the / and project name to the end of the new file path. Otherwise, you won't be able to save your project. Cool? So in the fourth part, we have to choose the programming language that we will use in our project. We will build our applications using Java. So I'll choose Java. Now the fifth section is minimum SDK. So in other words, if we want our applications to run on Android, we can determine it from this section. As you know, Android is continually releasing new versions like Android 9, Android 10, 11. So from this section, we can determine the minimum Android level at which our application will run. For example, if we choose Android 8, well, the application will work on Android 8, Android 9, Android 10, and 11, right? So it's 8 and up. So the version you choose refers to the minimum Android version that it's going to work on. Notice that when I choose any version, Android Studio tells us right here below what percentage of Android devices this application will run on. It's always useful info. So if you're going to publish your app on the Play Store, you can choose a low Android version from this section. Of course, at this point, I should also mention the following. Since some codes are updated in every new version of Android, choosing the lowest Android version can sometimes cause you problems. Therefore, yes, there is another option. I generally choose API 17 as my level. Now, of course, we can change all these settings later, my friends, but I want to show you where they are. But since we are doing some sample projects, for now, you can just choose any version. So finally, a checkbox has been created here, and we'll be able to use the Android support library, which is Android's old library. So we're not going to choose this option because we are going to use the Android X library. And this is the current library of Android. And we're going to be using this in our projects as we continue. So now we'll be able to create our first project just by clicking the Finish button. And depending upon what sort of computer and what horsepower it's got, it might take a little while to create your first project. It is all related, but it's all good. If you have a pretty fast computer, you can create your project course in a shorter period of time. You may encounter an assistant like this when any innovation or update is made in Android Studio. So you can review this document. You can also close this window by clicking the Assistant tab here. Now, in the lower right part of the interface, we'll see an expression regarding the process of creating the first project. So here, we shouldn't take any action before seeing the project is completed. Otherwise, you may encounter some problems in your project, right? So again, opening the Build tab here, we can see if the project has completed. So when the project's completed, or if there are any errors that it encounters, you can see these operations from this section here. So the process of creating the project, like I said, may take some time. That's why I'm going to just stop the screen recording at this point. And when the project completes, we'll continue where we left off. All right, my friends, as you can see, our project's been created. So far, we have set up Android Studio, created our first project. So we'll take a short break here, and in the next lesson, we're going to examine the interface of Android Studio. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Well, hello, friends. So now that we've completed the installation of Android Studio in our previous lesson, now we'll be able to examine the interface of Android Studio. So I'm sure that you're ready, so let's get started. So after creating our first project, we encountered a screen like this. So at this point, I would like to remind you once again, after making sure that your project has been completely loaded in the build section, you should do the necessary action. So if your project has not been uploaded, you can wait for the project to be fully loaded without any further action. All right, so after making this reminder, now we can examine Android Studio's interface. So we can basically examine the interface in 4 parts. The first part is the part where we do the coding and make the necessary designs for our projects. Now you're going to see it better if we close the build window here. And if you notice, there are 2 tabs here. The first is the main activity.java, which we will use to write our Java code. And the second is the activity main.xml file that we can design for our projects. Now, while developing an Android application, we'll first create the design of the application that we'll do, and then we make the necessary coding for the design. Actually, this is the part where we will use as a basis, right? So for now, you just need to know this preliminary information. So after examining other parts of the interface, we will examine this part in detail. Now the section on the left over here is the section where the project files are located. If you see this part differently, you can click on the part, type Android above, and here you may have project instead of Android. You can select the Android option from the pop-up menu. So when we create a project in Android Studio also creates many different files related to our project for us. Thus, we have the opportunity to run our project on different platforms or share it with different people, publish our project. So if the project is selected instead of Android, we will be viewing all the project files that are and have been created here. Of course, this creates a complex view because we will not be able to use every file created. So for a simpler view, let's make sure that this Android option is selected. Now, when we examine the project directory here, a new folder has been created under a Java folder with the package name we determined while creating the project, right? And just below the package folder, the Java class, that is main activity, has been created. So while developing an Android application, we will make applications that will require more than one class. So this stage, the Java classes that we will create will appear here. And of course, we also mentioned the design file. So you might ask, where's the design file, right? Well, if you look a little below the project directory in here, you will see that a folder named Res has been created. Now, it's actually the resource folder. It's a folder where design files, images, colors, text styles, and themes related to our project are going to be kept. Don't worry, we'll get to examine them in detail in our upcoming lessons. But I want to tell you that there is also the design file of our application in the layout folder here. So if you close the main activity.java and activity main.xml file, just by closing or pressing the X icon right next to the tabs here, you can open them again from the project directory. So if you double click on these files right here in the project panel, you can open them again. We can also shrink and expand the part reserved for the project directory. For this, you can position your mouse on the line between the project panel and the main panel. Now, if you notice that the cursor changes, so you can drag it left or right to expand or collapse the project panel. You can also completely close and then open your project panel. For that, you can minimize, see the minimize icon here. And if you want to open the project panel again, you can click on the project tab here. All right, so there's the project panel. That's how it works. Now let's have a look at the toolbar window at the top of the interface. Of course, there are many tabs up in here. From the File tab, there's a Help tab, and you see that in many interfaces. So first, let's have a look at the File tab. As you can see, there are many features in here. We're mainly going to examine the features that we're going to be using during the course. We'll examine some of the other features as needed. But first, you can create a new project by using the New and New Project options here. And then by using the Open button, you can open a project that you have created and saved previously. You can also close your open project by using the Close Project option. And there is a Settings option here to make some necessary settings for Android Studio. So my friends who are using a Mac can click on Android Studio tab to the left of the File tab and select Preferences from the pop-up menu. So why don't we open up the settings screen now, and you can search the feature that you want right here in the search bar. For example, the size of the text in the area that we will be coding, I think it's quite small. So I'm just going to increase the size of the font, and that way you'll be able to see it better. All right, maybe me. So when I write font, the related features come up, right? So in order to change the required properties, I'll first delete the font text from the search bar, and then the relevant fields become active. So you can change the font in the font section here. You can also increase the size of text from the size option just below. I'm going to make it 18. And as you see, the text becomes much more legible. Now, naturally, you don't have to do this step, but I'm going to do it this way so that you can see it better. All right, so let's take a look at another feature. So I'll type in theme in the search bar. So by using this feature, you can change the interface to dark mode or light mode. Okay, so let's finally examine the SDK section and finish the settings section. So I'll write SDK into the search bar. And here you can see the SDK location. There are also 3 tabs just below. The first is SDK platforms. Now, if there was any sort of a problem during your installation, well, we could always download the SDK that we need from here. As you can see, here's a statement that it is indeed installed. Now, if you also write another statement, you should check the checkbox here and press the Apply button here. And that way you will reinstall SDK. So I'll open up the second tab, the SDK Tools tab. And what you're looking at is there are 4 tools installed. If any one of them is missing, that is, if it doesn't happen to be installed, you should check the checkbox here and press the Apply button. So we can also install Google Play services and USB driver tools here. That way you can test your projects on your personal Android device instead of testing them on the emulator. So you can also install these tools if you want. So for this, I'll tick the checkboxes here and press the Apply button. So when you click on the OK button, the necessary installation processes begin. And as you can see, my friends, if you encounter any errors during the installation process, if the necessary tools are not installed properly, whatever, you can always use this settings section to complete your installation. All right, so now the download process is over, and I'll press the Finish button. And yeah, so that's what you can do in the Settings section. Now let's have a look at the other tabs that we're going to be using. So I want to show you the View tab. You can use this tab to toggle many views of the interface. For example, using the Tool window, it's the tab right here. We can open and close the tools on the edges of the interface. And again, from the Appearance section here, you can select which tools you want to appear in the interface. For example, if we select the toolbar from here, the icons for saving the project, opening an existing project, or reloading the project appear in the interface. So I'm going to undo this because that finishes what's under the View tab. So we're not going to really use the other tabs very much, but we will use the tabs that need to be used in our progressing lessons. So that's why I want to show you what's under the Build tab here. So sometimes after the project has been created, a number of errors can occur. So in this case, you might need to rebuild your project. So to rebuild a project, you can use the Rebuild Project tab here. You can rebuild your project from here. And but don't worry, I'm going to explain this section in the tutorial where we will install the emulator. All right. So don't get too carried away. So why don't we go ahead and examine a little bit of the design area. So for this, I want to open the activity main.xml file. So let's just close the project panel, and you'll be able to see it more easily. All right, that's better. So you can also zoom in on the design area just by pressing the plus icon here. All right. So now we are focusing on the design area. And again, the design area incorporates 4 different sections. The first is the palette section on the upper left over here. And these are the components that we will use while we are designing. For example, we'll access many components such as buttons, text views where we can write text, and image view components where we can add images. We'll be able to see their use in detail, of course, in the next lessons. I'm just giving you a general overview at the moment. So we can drag and drop any of these components here into the design area. Notice that the design area looks like a phone screen. In fact, if you click on the eye icon here and select the Show System UI option, you'll get a real Android phone screen. Right, so that's what you could do in the design area. Let's activate the Show System UI option again. So in previous versions of Android Studio, Show Layout Decoration was used instead of Show System UI. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but now you know. And that's how you make your designs better. So let's just delete the text view component where Hello World is written. And to do that, just click on the component, hit delete, right? And now to undo this, I can press Control or Command Z for Mac from the keyboard. I'll zoom in a little bit. And another way to delete any component, after selecting the component, you can right-click with your mouse, and then from the options that appear, select the Delete option. And to undo this, I'll press Control or Command Z for Mac from the keyboard. Now, finally, you can select and delete the component from the Component Tree section. So that's the second part of the design area. Again, to add components to the design area, you can drag and drop the component you select from the palette section into the Component Tree section. And component tree is a section where the components that we use in the design area are going to be located. So we can choose the components from the design area, or we can select them from the component tree and change any properties that we want to change. We could change the properties of components in the attributes section as well, located on the far right. Now, in order to change any property of a component, for example, the text size or color, after selecting the component from the design area or the component tree, we can find the feature that we want in the attributes section and make those changes happen. And again, not to worry, we'll do all of these procedures in detail later on. But I do want to draw your attention to this. Notice that the design file is actually a .xml file. So in other words, XML code is actually created for all the components that we're going to be using while designing, as well as the properties of these components. For example, to add a button to the design area, we can either drag and drop the button from the palette or create it by typing XML code. And for this, we can open the split or code tabs in the upper right corner. And if we open the code section, we will only see the section where XML codes are written. If we open the split section, we can see both XML and design. Now you can also open the component tree and palette if you want. If you open the design tab, you can only see the design area. Now pay attention to this. The XML code of the button that we created, do you see how it's created automatically? So in our next lessons, we will learn to create components using XML code. All right. So my friends, the interface of Android Studio tour is now complete. Now I've shown you the sections that we'll use most frequently in the upcoming lessons. So we're going to learn these 3 sections in pretty good detail. But before we end here, I should also mention that since Android Studio is constantly improving yourself, you may see some differences in the interfaces in our next lessons. For example, the code and design section here was at the bottom left in previous versions, and this split option wasn't even available. So you may see slight differences in the interface like this. Not a big deal. If there is an update about coding, we will update our related course as soon as we can. All right. So now we can end our lesson, and I want to see in the next lesson where we're going to create an emulator, or what's often called an Android virtual device. So we'll take a short break here, and I want to see you in the next lesson. Well, hello, friends. So we examined the interface of Android Studio in a previous lesson. So in this lesson, we will install the Android virtual device, and this is going to be the emulator that will allow us to test the applications that we're going to make. So once you're ready, let's get started. First off, let's just delete the text view and the button components from the design area that we created in the previous lesson. And to do that, I'll select the 2 components from the component tree section and press delete, which is right here on the keyboard. Okay, so my design area is now clear. So before starting the emulator setup, I would like to give you a little bit of extra information just about how to open and close a project, or how to close an open project, or how to open a new project, how to open a previously created project, in fact. So in order to close an open project in Android Studio, just first click on the File tab in the upper left corner of the interface. So it's here right now, and then you just click on the Close Project option from the menu that opens. So if you follow these steps, you can close a project that's open in Android Studio. So after you close a project, you'll be able to see the start screen of Android Studio. Of course, if your goal is to create a new project, you should just select the Create New Project option from here. We learned how to create a new project in Android Studio in the setup lessons earlier. So for now, the section that you see on the left is the section where projects that you have created before are listed. If a project you've done before appears in this area, you can just open your project by clicking on the project. And if the project you want to open does not appear in this area, the second way you can do that is select Open an Existing Project option from here. So you can, of course, open any project on your computer. This is where you're going to need to know the file path where your project was saved, should you not use the default option. So we had to specify the folder where the files will be saved earlier when we created our first project. Now, your projects are saved to the file path that you specified. If you happen to know where your project's been saved at this stage, you will just need to access the folder with your project. As you can see, I got access to the first project that we created, the first project file. Now you have to make sure that your project is selected here, so you don't want to scroll down the triangle of over here to the left of your project. You just have to choose the project file, right? So then after making sure that the project file is selected, we can open up our project by pressing the OK button. Then when you open your project, Android Studio will show us a tip. Tip of the day. You can always tip your hat to the tip of the day. You can read this, but I usually check the don't show tips. But that's just me. I don't want this one to open every time. Cool, so now we have to wait for our project to be fully created. And that means that we shouldn't take any action before our project is completely created. So, cool. Here we go. So our project's been created successfully, and we can now start the setup of our Android virtual device. And before moving on to the emulator installation, I would like to talk just a little bit about one more thing. In order to use the emulator, the virtualization technology must be enabled on your computer. Now, most new computers have this technology enabled by default. It may not be enabled on some AMD processors, but you might as well find out, right? So just go ahead and look in your Task Manager. I'm just typing here Task Manager in the search bar, open up Task Manager, and I'll open the Performance tab. And yeah, there's all kinds of information here, but as you can see, it appears that there is virtualization enabled. So if virtualization technology doesn't happen to be enabled on your computer, you've got to do this by accessing the computer's BIOS menu. Shouldn't be too difficult. Opening the BIOS menu may differ, though, between different computers, depending on so many different things. So by examining the document, I will add after this lesson. Please remind me to do that now. You don't have to. I've already done it. You can have the information about opening your BIOS menu. All right. Or, you know what? As a result of a simple search on the internet, according to the brand and model of your computer, you can find out pretty quickly. But I don't want to prolong this any further. You just have to know. Okay. Now, probably the majority of you have this feature enabled. Still just need to point it out. You can also access detailed information about emulator installation by examining the link that I will also leave under this lesson. So why don't we just get to the emulator installation? So in Android Studio, to create a virtual device or to start an existing virtual device, we'll need to click on the phone icon on the top right of the interface. Notice when I move the mouse cursor over the phone icon, AVD Manager appears. Now let's open the AVD Manager by pressing the phone icon, and when we click it, a window opens like this. And this shows us our virtual devices. Of course, since I've created 2 virtual devices before, these virtual devices appear here, but since you are creating a virtual device for the very first time, you might see a different screen, but don't worry about that. We'll have the same screens soon because we'll do everything step by step together. Now, at this point, I do want to show you how you can delete a virtual device that you've created before. So click on the gray triangle at the end line here where each virtual device is shown. So clicking it will open some views. If you select the duplicate option, you'll obviously create a copy of your existing virtual device. If you choose the delete option at the bottom, you will completely delete the virtual device that you've created. And if you choose the wipe data option, well, that means that you'll just delete all the data on your virtual device, on the virtual device only, of course. Sometimes we can use this option because as we develop projects and then we test them on virtual devices, the size of the virtual device on the disk increases, and then it can begin to slow down. So when you're faced with that kind of situation, you might just need to clean the virtual device. And by selecting the delete option here, I will delete the virtual devices that I created earlier. And together we will create our virtual device from the very beginning. All right. So I'll also just delete the other virtual device. All right. So now that we've deleted the virtual devices that I had left over, I created them earlier. We probably are looking at the same screens, right? So now we can create our own virtual device step by step. So first of all, I'll just click the Create Virtual Device. So it's this button here to create that virtual device. And when you click it, a window opens just like this. And this is the first step in creating a virtual device. All right. So the left of the window, you see here, there's a number of categories. And as you know, Android operating system is an operating system that can be used in televisions, phones, watches, tablets, cars. So in other words, choose a category according to what you're going to make your application for, which platform. Now, since we're going to be making applications that can run on the phone, I'm going to choose the phone option. And then later here, we'll see phones built by Google. So you can choose any virtual device here. However, it might be better if you choose any of the devices with the Play Store application installed. And as a result, we'll produce an application, and there may be some things that we have to do in the Play Store regarding the application. So I'll generally choose the devices that have the Play Store application installed. Just a heads up or an FYI. You can also see the size and the resolution of the virtual devices from here. So taking all of the different features into account, you can choose any virtual device. Typically, I'll prefer the Pixel 2 because both the Play Store application is installed and the resolution and size are ideal. So I indeed will choose the Pixel 2 virtual device. So after selecting Pixel 2, I press the next button at the bottom right, and then we'll click the next button, and the window with Android versions opens. Now, we can probably determine which version of Android that we want to have installed on our virtual device. The most current version is Android 11 or Android R, all right? I wonder, your screen probably has the word download next to all versions. But since I have already downloaded the Android R version before, you're not going to see the download statement. So don't worry about that. Usually you just select the most current version at this stage, but you can always download other versions as well. Now, if you do want to download any other version, of course, just click the download option here. And as soon as you click on it, the download will start automatically. And then again, the process might take some time. But since I have downloaded Android R before, I'm just going to cancel this. But I did show it to you, so there you go. When the download is complete, just click on the Finish button, and thus the version of Android you downloaded will be installed onto your virtual device. So now I'll just cancel the download by pressing the Cancel button, and after downloading Android 11, press Next again. So this step is the last step in the process of creating a virtual device. You can name your virtual device from this window that opens. However, usually we want virtual devices with a default name here. You can also specify the startup orientation of your virtual device from here. I'm going to choose Portrait, and generally that's what I use. And sure enough, we can now create our virtual device by clicking the Finish button. And as you see, our virtual device has been created. All right, so now let's test it out. Let's run our virtual device now. So to launch the virtual device, simply press the triangle that looks like the play icon here. And just by clicking on this triangle, it's going to launch our virtual device. This process can take a little time, my friends. So at this stage, you've got to be patient. Don't skip anything just to get ahead. And I'll just close this warning window. All right, so as you can see, the virtual device is just like a real phone. Of course, the installation process takes a long time, so I'll just speed up this part a little bit so that the duration of the lesson doesn't get too long. And I'll also close this window. All right, so now our virtual device is turned on. Now, first, let's log into the Play Store using our email address. So I'll press the Sign In button. You can write your email address in the field here. And after typing in your email address, we'll click the Next button. So we need to confirm the two-step verification. Next, we'll need to accept the Google Play terms of the agreement. And we must also accept the rules of Google services. And as you can see, we can access the application that we want to right from here, just as if we open the Play Store application on a real device. That's cool, huh? Now, of course, I explained these steps just for you to know. It's not necessarily so that you know about application development. It's just where you might want to go one day. We're not going to go there today. Also, I don't recommend installing and running any application from the Play Store to your virtual device, because the virtual device, well, kind of works a lot slower. So no need to slow down by installing more apps, right? All right, so let's take a brief look at the other features of our virtual device. You can turn your emulator device on and off using the power button here. You can also increase or decrease the volume of the device. You can take the phone in portrait or landscape mode. So here you can see the back, home page, and overview buttons. And then by pressing the More option here, we can access the other features. You can use maps. And we will use this section when we're going to make a weather forecast application in future lessons. And here again, you can see cellular, battery status, and from here you can access the photos on your virtual device. And again, there's an area where you can make virtual calls. Of course, we are going to hardly use these features here. I just want to show you for your own information. So maybe we can use the location section when we're going to make our weather application, and we'll just add a Google Maps complication. That'll be fun. But for now, let's close this window just by pressing the X in the upper right corner. Now from here, if you swipe up with your mouse, you can access the apps on the phone. Cool, huh? All right, my friends, the installation of the virtual device is now complete. The question becomes, how do we run a project that we made on a virtual device? That's a great question. And first of all, we can minimize our virtual device by clicking the minimize icon here. So in future lessons, we're going to make some applications, and we'll need to test these applications on our virtual device. So if you notice, here we see the virtual device that we've just completed the setup for. And if we had more than one virtual device, or if we connected a real Android device, we'd be able to see all of those devices here. On whichever device that you want to test your application, you could just choose a device from here. But for the moment, since we only have the one virtual device, I'll choose Pixel 2. Then press the green triangle icon here. This will run the application and test it. So if you want, let's add a button to the design area before we test the project. So I'll select the button component from the palette and drag it to the design area. Now, you don't need to do this. I'm just going to show you how to test a project on a virtual device. So again, don't worry about it. We will learn these in detail in the coming lessons. So I'll just move the design area a little closer. So now let's change some properties of the button in the attribute section. And I'll just increase the width of the button. Make the width of the button maybe 300 dp. And now I'm changing these features quickly. So again, you'll learn them all later. Don't worry. So we'll make a background color red. So to change the property of a component, you've got to make sure that you select the relevant component from the design area or the component tree. We can change the text on the button. For example, we can write Hello World. And after changing any property you want, just apply the change to the component by pressing the Enter key on the keyboard. So why don't we change the size of Hello World again? Finally, I'll make a text style feature bold. Yeah, and then we'll determine the constraint values of our button. And in our constrain layout lesson, we'll explain again this process in detail. So let's just run it and test the application now. So I'm pressing the green triangle right here, and just below the interface, we can see the application has started to run. Now, the first time that you run your project, you may have to wait a bit. It might take some time. But as you can see, our application opens, and we can also see the button that we created in the design area. Now, of course, we haven't written any code for now. I just showed you very simply how to run your project on a virtual device. In our up and coming lessons, we're going to write code along with the designs that we do for our projects. So for now, we can terminate the project that we're running, and I'll show you how to terminate a project. You just press the red square icon here, And then, of course, pressing this will stop your running project. Just press the green triangle to run the project again. All right. So that is how to set up a virtual device. And it's also how to test your very own project on a virtual device. Cool. So we're going to take a short break here. And in the next lesson, we're going to continue to review Android Studio. I'll see you in the next one. Well, hello, friends. So in this lesson, we're going to install Genymotion, which is another emulator. So Android virtual devices may not work correctly on some friends' computers, so you can use the Genymotion emulator as a secondary device if you'd like. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to install the Genymotion emulator. Now, if you've successfully created the Android virtual device, you can skip this tutorial, or you can still create and use a Genymotion emulator. Either way, you're going to learn something. So first up, let's open up the web browser of your choice. And I'll just type in download Genymotion in the search bar. I then hit enter on the keyboard and go to the Genymotion site right here. All right. So my friends, if you pay attention here, there are Genymotion's download links for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Now, since, as you might have noticed, my system is Windows 64-bit, well, that's what I'm going to download for my Windows machine. So just make sure that you download what you need for your machine. Also, can you see there are two different options here, without VirtualBox and with VirtualBox? If you have a VirtualBox installed on your computer, you can select the without VirtualBox option from here. Since there is no VirtualBox on my computer, I'm going to choose the with VirtualBox option here, my friends, and maybe that's what you'll do as well. So pressing the button here starts the necessary download process. Now the download may take some time, so therefore I'm just going to stop the screen recording and then pick it up when we get back. Now the download's complete. We will continue from where we left off, my friends. So before proceeding with the installation process, I would like to mention one more thing. If you pay attention, here are some system requirements for using Genymotion. For example, for Windows, you must have a computer with Windows 8, Windows 8.1, or Windows 10 installed. Also, your computer must have a 64-bit operating system. And again, virtualization technology needs to be enabled, my friends. And we'll also need more than 4 gigs of RAM. And you can install Genymotion just by considering these system requirements and just proceed after, or maybe you already know what they are. But in any event, it's always good to know. So I'll click on the arrow icon here and select the Show in Folders option. Yeah, so the file with the extension .exe that we've downloaded is here. So I'll double click on this file with the mouse, and here the operating system will ask, do you allow this app to make changes to your device? It asks a question. I answer with the press of the yes button. All right, so now I'll select the installation language. It's going to have to be English. And here it shows the file path where the files will be saved. So I'll press the next button again, press the next button again, and next again. And finally, I get to the install button to press, and that's what begins the installation process. Now, this might take a little time, so I'll just speed it up from here. All right, so now we get to the VirtualBox installation. All right, so I'll just press the next button, and I'll press the next button again. Press the next button again. So finally, I'll press the yes button from here, and now I can start the installation of VirtualBox just by clicking on the install button. All right, very good. So we've successfully completed the VirtualBox installation. So here I'll press the finish button. All right, so that installs Genymotion. All right. So my friends, let's open the desktop and see if a shortcut for Genymotion has been created. Whoa, look at that. As you can see, a shortcut has been created for Genymotion and for VirtualBox. So let's run Genymotion. I'll press the Finish button in the installation wizard. Okay, so as you can see, Genymotion is starting up. So in order to use Genymotion emulators, we're going to need to create an account. Now, if you do happen to have a Genymotion account that you've created before, well, you can just enter your email and password from here. But if you don't have any Genymotion account, not to worry. We've got to create a new account just by clicking the Create Account button here. Now, when you click this button, the Register page opens. And we must enter the necessary information and just go through the fields here. So yeah, I'm writing my email address, and I'll set in a password. And you can choose your country. And again, you can select the Test Automation for Continuous Integration option. And this is the usage type in this field, right? Finally, you can choose Others as company type. And after filling in the required fields, we need to check the checkboxes here. All right, so after accepting the necessary contract terms, there's the Create button. And yeah, see, Create Account becomes active. So then you click this button, and then a verification link is sent to the email address that you used for registration. So I'm hoping that I either didn't mistype it or you're not using a dummy account. So we need to open up that email address and click on the verification link. So I'm going to click here, and as you can see, the activation process has been completed. And that was a success story. So now we can start using the Genymotion emulator using the registered email address and password. So I got to write my email address in this field again, and I'll write my password in this field. Press on the next button. So here I got to choose the personal use option, right? I'll press the next button. Now from this page, we need to accept the user license again. All right. So after I check this box, I can press the next button. All right, so we have now completed the Genymotion installation. Now let's create the Genymotion emulator. So by clicking the button here, you can access all emulators. So from here, you can choose any emulator you want. For example, let's use the Google Nexus 5 emulator. So from here, we need to select the emulator that you want and press the next button. Thus, the emulator installation begins. And again, the process may take some time, so I'm just going to stop screen recording right now. And when the installation process completes, we'll continue right from where we left off. Hey, that was quick. So my friends, the installation process is now complete. You can now run the emulator by clicking the Start button here. But before I run the emulator, I do want to show you one more thing. If you click on the three dots here, you can see some options related to the emulator. You can run the emulator by clicking the Start option here. Or you can rearrange the emulator by clicking the Edit option here. So if you click Delete again, you can delete the emulator. You can also create another copy of your emulator by clicking on the Duplicate option here. You can use the options here, as many as you need. But for right now, let's just run the emulator. So for this, I'll choose the Start option. Of course, you may encounter an error when you run the emulator for the first time. So I want to show you this error and a few of the solutions in a little while, all right? But during the start of the emulator, the operating system might give you some different warnings. Just press the Yes button. So here's an error. Now, you may not have encountered this particular one, but usually when we run the emulator for the first time, this error may occur. So to solve this error, we just need to click the link here. As you can see, this page shows the situations that can cause the error and their solutions. As I mentioned earlier, virtualization technology has to be enabled on your computer. Now, if you are sure about this, you can move on and look at some of these other solutions. You can see there are multiple solutions here, so you got to try them thoroughly and use the solution that is most suitable for you. This is not a course on troubleshooting, but I'll give you an example. I've implemented solution number 1, and that made the emulator work. So probably many of you will run the emulator successfully when you follow this solution number 1. So I would also recommend closing and reopening Genymotion after following any of the solutions. So this will take into account any changes that you make. As you can see, my emulator works. Now let's see what we can use this emulator and how to use this emulator in Android Studio. So I want to open Android Studio. And as you can see, as soon as we run the emulator, Android Studio automatically detects it, and the running emulators are listed right here. So from here, you can just choose the emulator that you want to run your project on. All right, my friends, that's how to install and use Genymotion emulator, which you can use instead of or alongside the Android virtual device. So use Android virtual device if you want, or Genymotion emulator if you want. The choice is entirely yours. I generally tend to use Android virtual device throughout the course, just so you know, but whatever. We'll take a short break here. See you in the next lesson. General information about the Gradle build system. Hello, everyone. I want to give you some information about the Gradle build system in this particular video. And before we start, I want to show you some Gradle files in Android Studio. So let's move on to Android Studio. I should add some reverb in there. Okay, so you can see the Gradle files on the left side here, and there are 2 important Gradle files for us, and that's level here. So these are build.gradle project. It's my first application file, and build.gradle module app file. Now, before we, really get in depth about these files, I do want to say something about Gradle. You're going, Gradle? Gradle is a build system that automates the build of Android application development. Gradle makes testing and building, debugging, releasing much easier. Gradle also makes adding new libraries into our project in Android Studio a whole lot easier as well. So here's the first page. It's my first application page. It's the version of Gradle system. Now, the most important page for us now is what build Gradle module app page. So this page is application, it's features, and you can see some of the values in here. I want to explain these values and what they mean. So the first one is compile SDK version. So this value determines which API level features we can use. For example, if this value is 25, we will not be able to use API 30 level features. If this API level is higher, then our application will have more advanced features, right? So if this API level is higher, then our application will also have more advanced features of higher API levels. Now, the second one is the application ID. This is a unique value. So for this application, it is com.example.myfirstapplication. Now, when we upload this application on Google Play, it will be known with this particular ID by Google Play. And the third one here is min SDK version. So this value determines which API level and above can work in our application. So it's a lower value, so it's a minimum value for this application. It is 22, and that means that this application will not work below API level 21, right? Now, the other one is the target SDK version. This value indicates that my application will work well at this API level in particular. Now, we should give the minimum SDK value as small as possible, and the compile SDK as big as possible, right? And also the compile and target SDK should be the same value. That's what I recommend, and I'm sticking to it. Now, another value is the version code. And you're going to use this code when you publish your application on Google Play. It has to be an integer value, like 1, 2, 3, and it continues on and on. Now, after you publish your application on Google Play, if you change something in your app and you want to upload your new version, you must increase this value. Otherwise, Google Play will not accept your new version of your application. And wouldn't that be a shame? So the version name is when people want to update the app on their phone and they see this value. This is unimportant for Google Play, but people will see this value. It can be 1.0, 1.1, and continues on and on. And when you update your app, you should give the new version name for the people who will download your app. And then when you change some value in Gradle, you will now see a sync button. And after you click this button, it will change everything or synchronize everything to the new values. And then lastly, should tell you about dependencies. So this is the part in Gradle that is reserved for libraries. And if you want to add a new library to your project, you will begin here. Android Studio and Gradle make it very easy to add new libraries, as I told you before. Now, before Android Studio wasn't like this. It wasn't so easy. But now you just add library code dependencies in this section and then click the Sync Now button. I won't even tell you about the history, but just remember that everything in your library will be added to your project automatically. All right? So I think this is about enough with Gradle, because this is not a Gradle course. I want to thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Or you'll see me. No, you'll see. We're going to do a lot in our next video, so let's just get to it. So here's an introduction to the manifest file. Hello, everyone. I want to speak to you today about Android manifest file. Now, the Android manifest file is an XML file. It is one of the most important parts of Android application projects. The basic information of our application can be accessed from this file. And we also get the basic permissions for the application in this file. So we can continue on to Android Studio, and here I'll open Android Studio, and you can find the manifest file under the app folder on the left-hand side of Android Studio. Now, when I open the manifest file, you can see that its extension is .xml. Now, if you look at this file carefully, you will see the package name. It is com.example.com, my first application. And we spoke about the package name before, right? Also, there's a line in the manifest file that is an Android icon. Now, it's second line under the application line, and we'll determine the icon of our Android application on the phone in this line. So we'll choose a picture for our Android application, and then after that, we'll put this picture in the map folder. And then we'll write the picture name on this line. Now, if we do not choose a picture for our application, Android Studio chooses a default icon, and that is the Android robot icon. Now, the other important line is the Android label line. And you see that the label is my first application for this project. And this line is for how our Android application name will be seen on the phone itself. So if we change this label, then our application name will also change on the phone. Also, all of our activity files are defined in the manifest file. So we have just one activity for this project right now. As you can see, it is defined in the manifest file in the activity line as a .main activity. And it's defined as a launcher activity in the category line. Now, if we create new activities and want one of these activities to be a launcher activity, then we should determine it to be a launcher activity in the manifest file. So launcher activity will, of course, launch first, and then we'll open the application on the phone. There's another important thing that I want to tell you about this Android manifest file. It's about user permissions. So when you develop an Android application, it will use some of the device features, such as camera and Wi-Fi, phone numbers, microphone, location, all that kind of stuff, right? So you cannot reach these features without getting the user permission. So that means, being a good developer, you have to first ask permission of the user. And then you just write it into the manifest file. And you can see it here, which permission you get from the user, such as access Wi-Fi. And this permission gives you access to the device Wi-Fi connection. Now, if you take network state permission, your application can use the device mobile internet. For example, if your application makes a phone call, you have to get the phone call's permission. You can take all of these permissions from the manifest file, but when you take these permissions from the manifest file, the user will see these permissions before downloading the app on Google Play. So after selecting the type of permission you will use in your application from the manifest file, you can press the / or Shift and greater keys on the keyboard to close the tag. Now, the other topic is screen orientation for this level. And when the user opens your app on the mobile device, your application will appear vertical or horizontal. Now, you can specify this in the manifest file. If you choose the screen orientation portrait, your application will appear vertical. And if you choose landscape, it will appear horizontal. And also, you can change your application activity theme in the manifest file. So by that, I mean right here, by theme is the top section of the activity. So you can see this is my first application part, and it's replaceable. And you can change the text color, the background color. You can add icons, a whole lot of things. Everything I mentioned that you can specify in this theme. And you can create a new theme, and then after that, you can change it on the manifest file. So we're going to do some examples about all of these topics and more in the coming videos. I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of all the information. It's enough for this level. So until then, see you in the next video. Introduction to resources. Hello, everyone. I want to tell you about some of the resources in Android Studio in this particular video. So let's get to Android Studio without losing any more time. Now, you know that we've opened a project on Android Studio, and we were going to give some information about our project file within Android Studio. So you can see the resources folder, which is here on the left side of Android Studio. And as it's called, it's a res folder. Now, there are 4 folders within the resources or res folder. These are the drawable, the layout folder, the map folder, and the values folder. Now, first of all, we're going to speak about the drawable folder. Now, this particular folder holds, of course, pictures for our project. And I'll just right-click on the drawable folder and click Show in the Explorer. And I can see this folder in the Explorer. Now, there's an XML file inside it. And I'll put some pictures, icons, and logos in this folder for using within my Android Studio project. And when I need these pictures, I can call it up, giving this folder path, right? And then I'll just copy a picture from another folder, paste it in the drawable folder. And after I close this folder, and you can see now that this picture is under the drawable folder in Android Studio. And if I click it, it will open. And then I can use this picture in my project, such as a background image. Now, another folder is the layout folder. And the layout folder holds XML activities files for our Android application. Now, you know that we have one activity now for this project, and its name is main activity. But there is a second part of this activity. So one is the XML file, the other is the Java file. All right, so the layout folder holds the XML file of the main activity. The main activity Java file is in order under the app Java com.example.myfirstapplication folder. So if we had other activities, their XML files would have been under the layout folder, and then we could work on each activity individually, whichever one we want. Now, another folder is the map folder. The map folder holds pictures and icons like the drawable folder. So I know what you're thinking. If the map folder holds pictures like a drawable folder, then why do we have 2 different folders for the pictures? But the map folder is not the same as the drawable folder. So I'll open up the map folder on Explorer, and then you can see here that there are 6 different map folders. They are mipmap HDPI, MHDPI, XHDPI, XXHDPI, and, well, etc. You can read them yourself. So why are there 6 different mipmap folders? So if you look at it carefully, you will see that there is the same picture in each of the mipmap folders. Now, if you recall, we spoke about Android applications. And before you can develop Android applications, you have to determine screen sizes, because you can develop Android applications for different screen sizes. In fact, you can develop Android applications for small screens, big screens, tablets, or Android televisions. So when you are developing these applications, if you use the same pictures for every screen resolution, of course, the pictures won't appear very well in your application. And we don't want that. It's going to look bad. So to solve the problem, Android Studio uses a mipmap folder. And then what you'll do is you will use copies of the same image in different resolutions, and they'll all be stored here. So whichever size of the device that you're going to be running your application, it will use the required photo from the Android Studio mipmap folder. For example, if your application runs on a small screen device, your application will use pictures in the MHDPI folder. Or if your application runs on a big screen device, it will use pictures in the XHDPI. Now, your application will make this decision automatically, but you also need to write some code for this operation to be successful. It doesn't work just by putting the pictures in the folder. I wish. Well, okay, maybe you wish. So we're going to see some examples about how to do this in the next couple of videos. This video is just giving you the general overview about Android Studio and what you can do in Android Studio. So we'll move on to the last folder, which is the Values folder. There are 2 XML files and 1 theme folder here. Now, in previous versions of Android Studio, there was a style.xml file instead of the theme folder. However, in the current versions of Android Studio, the theme folder was created instead of the style.xml file in order to access the dark theme and light theme features more easily. So we're going to examine this in a moment, but for now, I'll click on and open Colors XML first. So you can define colors for your project in this XML file. So you see there are 7 colors in here. Every color has a code. This code is XML code. And you can define colors using XML code. You can find every color XML code way out there in the worldwide internet. So you'll choose a color, put in its code in this file. So after that, you'll need to, well, name your color. So here the name is purple, teal, black, white. So when I need this color, I will just call it by name. For example, I want to change my main activity background color. I'll go to the main activity XML and I will choose the background in the attributes section where the right side of the Android Studio interface is. Then after that, a window is going to open and I can see the names in the color section in this window. Now also there are other basic colors in here. But of course there are millions of color codes and you won't be able to find every color in Android Studio. So because of this, if you want to use a new color, you can define that color in the Colors XML file. All right. So then after that, you can give this color a name. And you can then use this name whenever and wherever you need to. So in other words, you won't need to remember the color code. So we'll write here the code and you can use it everywhere you need. So what I'm going to do is add a new color here. As an example, I'll copy the last line and I'll paste it under. After that, I change the name color red, also change the color code, but we, of course, won't be able to know the code of every color. If we do know the color code, we can write it here. If we don't know the color code, we can find it out there on the internet. Or we could always click on the color box on the left, and that opens a palette where we can choose a color. So we can choose the color that we want from here. I'm just going to choose red for now. So note here, though, that this is the code for the color that I chose. So later when I click anywhere outside of the color palette, I'll be creating my new color, right? All right, so now it's added. That's easy. So I'll go back to the main activity and try to change the background again. And I will see this new color on the list called red. Yay! Now, the other XML file is string XML. Now, you can give it a name. In fact, you can name every string, word, or sentence. So when you need this string or sentence, you can call it by its name. Also, you can add arrays here. And after that, you can call it from the Java file. Also, we will use this file to design our application for multilingual. All right, so that's cool. I'm not going to get into a detailed explanation for now in this video, but you see that there's a lot of things to learn in here. So the last folder is the theme folder. And what do you think? This folder is for themes. There are two different XML files in the theme folder. First is for light mode. Second is for dark mode. And of course, that gets created automatically by Android Studio. If you're familiar with previous versions of Android Studio, there was a style.xml file instead of this theme folder. And the theme was created for light mode only. So right now, why don't we open up both themes? And as you can see, both have the same XML codes, but only the colors are different. So for this reason, it will be enough for us to examine the XML file containing the light theme. Now, if you notice, there are primary and secondary colors here. The primary colors are the colors displayed in the design area. For example, color primary is for the app bar in the design area. The app bar is commonly known as the action bar. The color primary variant is also for the color of the top part of the application interface. Color primary defines the color of the application where we write the name of the application section. So you can see that here is the app name. Now, when you change these colors from the styles XML file, all of the application activities app bar colors will change automatically. Also, you can create a new theme here, and which activity that you want to use, you can just change the theme from the manifest file, and it too will change. Also, we said that with the new version of Android Studio, it becomes easier to switch to the dark theme. Well, why don't we take a look at this now? So let's open up the design area, and when we click on the orientation icon here, we can see the night mode option. And if you select night mode, your design space will turn into this dark mode, and all components in the design area will have this dark theme color scheme applied. And if you click the orientation icon again and select the not night option, the colors in the bright theme will be applied to your design area. See how easy that is, my friends? All right, so that's all you need to know for now. In our next lessons, we will learn all of the issues in detail, and we'll practice all of the solutions, okay? So why don't we just have a short break here, and I want to see you in the next lesson. Cool. All right, hello everyone. So I want to talk to you a little bit about r.java files in this video. So it's going to be some general information about the r.java file that you really ought to know about. So this r.java file is an auto-generated file by Android Studio. Now you know there are two parts of the Android Studio application project. First one is an XML file. Second one is the Java file. Now we do all of the design over on the XML file, and all the designs that we made in XML file is then translated into Java code by Android Studio. That way we don't have to write things twice, right? So Android Studio gives an ID to every component that you've designed in the XML file. And then these IDs are kept in the r.java file. These IDs can be used on the Java side to perform any action on your XML files. So now we'll go to Android Studio, and you can see here the project files, XML design side, as well as the main activity on the Java side. All right, so first I just want to show you where this r.java file lives. So I'm going to choose Project Option on the left-hand side of Android Studio. Now this R file is respectively under the My First Application folder, App folder, Build folder, Intermediates folder, the Compile and Runtime folder, and of course the Debug folder. So if you've been paying attention, there is an r.jar zip file. Now, we actually can just unzip this file. So for this, I'll right-click on this r.jar file and select Show in Explorer as my option, or the option Open in Explorer. And I'll just unzip this file. So right-click on the R file, select Extract Here as your option. All right, so as you can see, two folders named Android X and COM have now been extracted. And let's expand this COM folder and Company folder. All right, so under the My First Application folder, there is the R class. Now at this stage, I would like to point out that the R file can be found in different places in different Android versions. So this file path might just change over time. However, you don't actually need to know where that R file is. You know why? Because we'll never use this file anyway. The reason, though, that I do want to show you this is because now you're going to know the Android component ID relationship. Scared you for a second there, huh? Just kidding. Now, what you have to do, though, in addition, is run your application at least once for the build folder to be created, right? So when you run your application, the build folder will be created automatically. All right, so now that we know that, we can continue to this. So opening up the R file, you're going to see it's generated automatically. So even if you delete this file, Android Studio will generate it again. You're not going to be able to get rid of it, really. All right, so you see that right here, it should not be modified by hand. All right, so for example, so this is our main activity, and its name is activity_main.xml. So we define this XML file on the Java side as r.layout.activity_main. Right, so activity_main is its ID. And you can actually see this ID in the R file. Now, as you can see here, there are different classes, right? And from here, I just want to find the layout class. All right, so here is the layout class. And notice that an ID is assigned for activity_main, right? Yeah, so this procedure actually is for every XML file under the res folder. So if I go back to Android project file, well, now you're going to see everything under the res folder, such as the drawable folder, map folder, layout folder, values folder. Okay, so now, for example, we have a text view in here, and now I will give it an ID. For this particular text view. Its ID is denim, and you can give any ID you want. But now you see this text view is an XML file, and you can see its XML codes in the text section. And now I will call this text view on the Java side. First, I will define this text view here. I will give a name to this text view. The name is the text that I gave. But you can give it any name you want. And after that, I will call this text inside the onCreate method. And I will call it from the R file. So I'll write here r.id.denim. And it is now identified. So I can do any operation on this text view using the text name. I can change its background color or its text size using Java code. We call the activity layout using the same method. For example, if I write here r.layout, it will call XML files under the layout folder. Also, if I write r.string, it will call strings inside the string XML file. So what do you think? I think this is enough for the R file in this particular video. See you in the next one.